Writer and scholar Norina Hertz reflects on her childhood. My throat hurts. It's burning. It really hurts. I can't go to school. It is a year of constant sore throats, streaming noses, bouts of the flu, she writes. I was in primary school, the year I felt the most isolated, excluded, alone. Every day I would sit on my own, watching the other kids from across the playground as they skipped and played, hoping they would ask me to join them. They never did. Hertz continues. It may seem a stretch to connect how lonely I felt back then with my swollen glands and sandpapery throat, but it turns out that loneliness has corporeal manifestations, and a lonely body is not a healthy one. This story in Hertz's book, The Lonely Century, could belong to any one of us. We are indeed a lonely country living in a lonely century. Tonight, on the eve of the new year, in this familiar place, surrounded by familiar people, lonely might even describe you. Whether it's a headache, a stomachache, a sore throat, or a stiff neck, loneliness is not just in our minds. It finds its way into our bodies, down to the cellular level. Just last year, the US Surgeon General called it a public health emergency, our epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And COVID-19 is not entirely to blame. The statistics are easy to find. Over 60% of adults in the United States feel lonely, with the loneliest ages 18 to 22. The number of people who live alone has increased by 30% in the last few decades. While Massachusetts fares well as the ninth least lonely state in the country, Maine and Vermont come in at first and second most lonely states, and New Hampshire is not far behind at number 9. Social isolation is as harmful to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Over the past several decades, back decks have replaced front porches. Our homes are larger, but our neighborhoods are shrinking. Americans spend 87% of our time indoors, plus an additional 6% alone in a car. The business lunch has all but disappeared. Some of us communicate with Alexa and Siri more than we talk to our partners and housemates. Coffee shops are built with more drive-through windows and pickup stations, but fewer tables and chairs. Carrie Cronin, a Boston College professor who teaches personal and spiritual development, noticed how apprehensive students were to interact with one another face to face. In her class on relationships, students asked her how to invite someone out on a date. Realizing that society is evidently losing this social script, she offered students extra credit if they asked someone out on a date. The instructions, though, were strict. Credit was only given for an in-person date that was not at a movie theater, did not involve alcohol, and was not physical beyond a friendly hug. The two people actually had to look at one another and have a conversation. We have become a lonely society of disconnected people. Whether we are texting someone in the next room, staring at a screen being interviewed through an algorithmic assessment process rather than by a human being, or sitting on the couch next to a companion robot watching TV, it is shocking just how far we have departed from the communities of our childhoods. The writer Claire Ronan said, "If loneliness was a color, it would have to be dark gray, because that is what it feels like when it hits you right in the stomach. It is a horrible, gut-wrenching feeling. No one knows how you feel inside." End quote. The Hebrew word for loneliness, badad, is used twice in the Hebrew scriptures to describe individuals, and both times with a negative connotation. In Genesis, Adam, the first human, is told by God that he should not live alone. And then in Exodus, Moses is chastised by his father-in-law Jethro for doing the work of leadership by himself without help. From ancient times until today, the implication is that humans need to be in the company of others, not alone. And as we look back over the past year, we have added a new type of loneliness to our identities as Jews. It is a collective post-October 7th loneliness that 1 year later still feels as imminent as it did when we woke up on that morning and realized that life in the state of Israel had changed forever. It is a shared loneliness that has left us feeling misunderstood as a people, alone as an entire community. Whether we live in North America, Israel, or elsewhere, child or adult, religiously observant or not at all, even if we have never stepped onto Israeli soil, Jews worldwide feel isolated, let down by our neighbors and allies, disappointed in diplomacy, despondent in the face of anti-Semitism, ashamed, unseen. Michael Oren writes, and I quote, "Anti-Semitism on the left stems from anti-racism, anti-meritocracy, and intersectionality, and on the right, from claims of Jewish power and conspiracy. Either way," he says, "the result is Jewish isolation. The result are campuses that Jewish students worked slavishly to get accepted, to only find themselves unwelcome, and social media in which Jewish memes intermingle with those of adorable kittens." End quote. At the level of Jewish peoplehood, this existential loneliness is profound because it is directed at us all, with hate speech and hate crimes and threats of violence. The reality today is that we are being shunned by people who just yesterday we thought were our friends. When we look closely at Jewish history, we see that what we feel is actually not new. We are living out the declaration made by the non-Jewish prophet Balaam in the book of Numbers, where he refers to the Jews as Am Levadad Yishkon, a people that dwells apart. Or even earlier, when Abraham, the first Jew, is called Ivri, Hebrew, literally one from the other side. From the very beginning of our story, Jews have been the people who are different from the rest, and not just demographically as a people from Mesopotamia, the other side of the Jordan River, but as a qualitatively different community with a distinct message. Abraham was a monotheist in a polytheistic world. His innovation was in his vision of a single God who demanded not just obedience, like other ancient civilizations, but also morality. The divine demand was not only difficult, but different. It required radical change and courage. The Midrash comments, Abraham was on one side and the world was on the other. Ethical monotheism has been a lonely mission, one that calls us to be a people that dwells apart. Dara Horn, the author of People Love Dead Jews, relates an incident about what it means to be a people that dwells apart. It took place in Amsterdam at the restored Anne Frank house, the house where Anne and her family had lived in hiding from the Nazis for more than 2 years before they were captured in 1944 and sent to Auschwitz. Today, the Anne Frank house is a living museum and hosts some 1 million visitors each year. Dara Horn writes, "But when a young employee at the Anne Frank house tried to wear his kippah to work, his employers instructed him to hide it under his baseball cap. They worried that a live Jew in a kippah might interfere with the museum's independent status." Dara Horn concludes, "The museum finally relented after deliberating for 4 months and permitted the employee to wear his kippah in public." This seems a rather long time for the Anne Frank house to ponder whether it was a good idea to force a Jew into hiding. We cannot be forced into hiding, and we must never be silenced. This past year, more than any other since the Holocaust, reminds us that being a people apart means facing the deep pain that comes from being hated and othered. For American Jews born after 1948, even the temptation to hide is new. The muscle memory of the many generations before us who had to repel the forces of anti-Semitism has been forgotten. We are scared. We watch our words and our backs, and just as we feel pushed aside by the peoples of the world who are external to us, we are also being pulled apart on the inside by dissent within our own Jewish circles. The pressure to conform, our fear of rejection, and our inability to respond in a unified way to the challenges of this moment have left us bereft, confused, directionless. Yet it was Einstein who said, "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity." And I would add, in the middle of loneliness, we find community. And it is with this optimism that we arrive at the new year, Rosh Hashanah. It is the birthday of the world, the chance to begin again. And tonight we resolve to set our loneliness aside. It is time to come together as a community in reflection and anticipation. Tonight we join Jews throughout the world and commit to the road less traveled, to the uniquely Jewish act of teshuvah, turning our individual loneliness into social justice, turning our existential aloneness into opportunities to create authentic community, turning our inclination to hide into acts of repair, tikkun olam. Tonight, we renew our promise to step up and improve the world. And this year, we need to double down and be bolder and stronger than ever before. We need to take the gifts that previous generations transmitted to us and enact them now. We need their gifts of resistance, their skills of survival, their unflagging energy to push our remarkable Jewish story forward in time and space. We are here to ensure that Judaism will not only survive, but thrive. We are here as guarantors that the Jewish people will not merely continue, but that we will loudly and proudly fulfill our mission to be a light to the nations. Once and over and over again, community has saved Jews and Judaism. We have never been a homogeneous monolith. We disagree, we diverge, we differ, but it is in our diversity that we find unity. Now is the time to step out of our isolation and despondency, to overcome the shock and horror of 1 year ago, and draw closer to our community, to our synagogue, and to one another. We need to listen to one another, celebrate and mourn with one another more passionately than ever before. Like the High Holy Day liturgy, we need to replace the words I and me with the language of we and us. This year, at the sounding of the shofar, we must wake up and live out the ethical monotheism that we promise the world. We face the future with optimism and hope. In an interview shortly after October 7th, Rabbi Sharon Brous told this story from the Mishnah. When the temple stood in Jerusalem, the people would take pilgrimages there to observe the festivals. They would ascend the steps to the Temple Mount, and they would go through an arched entryway. They would turn to the right and then circle around the perimeter of the courtyard. Finally, they would go back under the arched entryway and exit the courtyard. Except, the Mishnah says, those who were broken-hearted. Those people would also go up to Jerusalem. They would ascend the steps, walk through the same arched entryway, but if instead of going to the right, they would turn to the left and circle the courtyard. And every single person who would pass them coming from the right would stop and ask a simple question: how are you? The person might answer, my loved one just died, I'm worried about my child, I'm lonely. Those who were walking from right to left would listen to the brokenhearted and offer a blessing before continuing their pilgrimage. Imagine your whole life you have dreamed of going up to Jerusalem, to the Holy Temple, and as you finally arrive and circle the courtyard, you are expected to stop and ask a person who's coming toward you and in a vulnerable state, are you okay? What's your story? Why do you suffer? I would guess at that moment, neither group really wanted to stop, look a stranger in the eyes, and share sorrow and blessing. But this is the lesson of ethical monotheism. What takes precedent on that day, like any other, is seeing people in their suffering, asking them to share their stories, blessing them. We need stories and we need blessings, even when it hurts, especially when we are at our lowest and loneliest. Today we walk in health and strength from right to left, but tomorrow, who knows? We may be circling from the left, hoping someone might see our pain, listen to us, offer blessings of healing and hope. May we find health, happiness, hope, and community in the new year. Shana Tova.